Christ, Object Lessons, Chapter 6. Other Lessons from Seed Sowing by Ellen G. White. From the work of seed sowing and the growth of the plant from the seed, precious lessons may be taught in the family and the school. Let the children and youth learn to recognize in natural things the working of divine agencies, and they will be enabled to grasp by faith unseen benefits. As they come to understand the wonderful work of God in supplying the wants of His great family, and how we are to cooperate with Him, they will have more faith in God and will realize more of His power in their own daily life. God created the seed as He created the earth, by His Word. By His Word, He gave it power to grow and multiply. He said, "Let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth." And it was so. And God saw that it was good. Genesis chapter 1, verses 11 and 12. It is that word which still causes the seed to grow. Every seed that sends up its green blade to the sunlight declares the wonder-working power of that word uttered by Him who spake, and it was, who commanded, and it stood fast. Psalm 33, verse 9. Christ taught His disciples to pray, "Give us this day our daily bread." And pointing to the flowers, He gave them the assurance, "If God so clothe the grass of the field, shall He not much more clothe you?" Matthew chapter 6, verses 11 and 30. Christ is constantly working to answer this prayer and to make good this assurance. There is an invisible power constantly at work as man's servant to feed and to clothe him. Many agencies our Lord employs to make the seed, apparently thrown away, a living plant, and He supplies in due proportion all that is required to perfect the harvest, in the beautiful words of the psalmist, "Thou visitest the earth, and waterest it. Thou greatly enrichest it. The river of God is full of water. Thou providest them corn, when Thou hast so prepared the earth. Thou waterest her furrows abundantly. Thou settlest the ridges thereof. Thou makest it soft with showers. Thou blessest the springings thereof. Thou crownest the year with Thy goodness, and Thy paths drop fatness." Psalm 65, verses 9 through 11, Revised Version. The material world is under God's control. The laws of nature are obeyed by nature. Everything speaks and acts the will of the Creator. Cloud and sunshine, dew and rain, wind and storm, all are under the supervision of God, and yield implicit obedience to His command. In everything that tends to the sustenance of man is seen the concurrence of divine and human effort. There can be no reaping unless the human hand acts its part in the sowing of the seed. Thus it is in every business pursuit, in every department of study and science. Thus it is in spiritual things, in the formation of the character, and in every line of Christian work. We have a part to act, but we must have the power of divinity to unite with us, or our efforts will be in vain. Whenever man accomplishes anything, whether in spiritual or in temporal lines, he should bear in mind that he does it through cooperation with his Maker. There is great necessity for us to realize our dependence on God. Too much confidence is placed in man, too much reliance on human inventions. There is too little confidence in the power which God stands ready to give. We are laborers together with God. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 9. Immeasurably inferior is the part which the human agent sustains, but if he is linked with the divinity of Christ, he can do all things through the strength that Christ imparts. The gradual development of the plant from the seed is an object lesson in child training. And the truths which the parable teaches were made a living reality in his own life, in both his physical and his spiritual nature. He followed the divine order of growth illustrated by the plant, as he wishes all youth to do. Although he was the majesty of heaven, the King of glory, he became a babe in Bethlehem, and for a time represented the helpless infant in its mother's care. In childhood, he did the works of an obedient child. He spoke and acted with the wisdom of a child, and not of a man, honoring his parents and carrying out their wishes in helpful ways, according to the ability of a child. But at each stage of his development, he was perfect, with the simple, natural grace of a sinless life. The sacred record says of his childhood, the child grew and waxed strong in spirit, filled with the wisdom and the grace of God was upon him. And of his youth it is recorded, Jesus increased in wisdom and stature, and in favor with God and man. Luke chapter 2, verses 40 and 52. The little ones should be educated in childlike simplicity. They should be trained to be content with the small, helpful duties and the pleasures and experiences natural to their years. Childhood answers to the blade in the parable, and the blade has a beauty peculiarly its own. The child should not be forced into a precocious maturity, but should retain as long as possible the freshness and grace of their early years. The little children may be Christians, having an experience in accordance with their years. This is all that God expects of them. They need to be educated in spiritual things, and parents should give them every advantage that they may form characters after the similitude of the character of Christ. In the laws of God in nature, effect follows cause with unerring certainty. The reaping will testify as to what the sowing has been. The slothful worker is condemned by his work. The harvest bears witness against him. So in spiritual things, the faithfulness of every worker is measured by the results of his work. The character of his work, whether diligent or slothful, is revealed by the harvest. It is thus that his destiny for eternity is decided. Every seed sown produces a harvest of its kind. So it is in human life. We all need to sow the seeds of compassion, sympathy, and love, for we shall reap what we sow. Every characteristic of selfishness, self-love, self-esteem, every act of self-indulgence will bring forth a like harvest. He who lives for self is sowing to the flesh, and of the flesh he will reap corruption. As the seed sown produces a harvest, and this in turn is sown, the harvest is multiplied. In our relation to others, this law holds true. Every act, every word, is a seed that will bear fruit. Every deed of thoughtful kindness, of obedience, or of self-denial will reproduce itself in others, and through them in still others. So, every act of envy, malice, or dissension is a seed that will spring up in a root of bitterness. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 15. Whereby many shall be defiled, and how much larger number will the many poison? Thus the sowing of good and evil goes on for time and for eternity. Liberality, both in spiritual and in temporal things, is taught in the lesson of seed sowing. The Lord says, "Blessed are ye that sow beside all waters." Isaiah chapter 32, verse 20. This I say, he which soweth sparingly shall reap also sparingly, and he which soweth bountifully shall reap also bountifully. 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 6. To sow beside all waters means a continual imparting of God's gifts. It means giving wherever the cause of God or the needs of humanity demand our aid. He which soweth bountifully shall reap also bountifully. The sower multiplies his seed by casting it away. So it is with those who are faithful in distributing God's gifts. By imparting, they increase their blessings. God has promised them a sufficiency that they may continue to give. Give, and it shall be given unto you, good measure, pressed down and shaken together, and running over, shall men give unto your bosom. Luke chapter 6, verse 38. By the casting of the grain into the soil, Christ represents the sacrifice of himself for our redemption. Except a corn of wheat fall into the ground and die, he says, it abideth alone, but if it die, it bringeth forth much fruit. John chapter 12, verse 24. So the death of Christ will result in fruit for the kingdom of God. And all who would bring forth fruit as workers together with Christ must first fall into the ground and die. The life must be cast into the furrow of the world's need. Self-love, self-interest must perish, but the law of self-sacrifice is the law of self-preservation. The seed dies to spring forth into new life, and in this we are taught the lesson of the resurrection. All who love God will live again in the Eden above. Of the human body laid away to molder in the grave, God has said, "It is sown in corruption, it is raised in incorruption. It is sown in dishonor, it is raised in glory. It is sown in weakness, it is raised in power." 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 42 and 43. Such are a few of the many lessons taught by nature's living parable of the sower and the seed. As parents and teachers try to teach these lessons, the work should be made practical. Let the children themselves prepare the soil and sow the seed. As they work, the parent or teacher can explain the garden of the heart with the good or bad seed sown there, and that as the garden must be prepared for the natural seed, so the heart must be prepared for the seed of truth. As the seed is cast into the ground, they can teach the lesson of Christ's death, and as the blade springs up, they can teach the lesson of the truth of the resurrection. The youth should be instructed in a similar way. They should be taught to till the soil. It would be well if there were, connected with every school, lands for cultivation. Such lands should be regarded as God's own schoolroom. The things of nature should be looked upon as a lesson book, which His children are to study, and from which they may obtain knowledge as to the culture of the soul. Unless hard work is bestowed on the soil, it will not yield a harvest. So with the soil of the heart, the Spirit of God must work upon it to refine and discipline it before it can bring forth fruit to the glory of God. The soil will not produce its riches when worked by impulse. It needs thoughtful daily attention. It must be plowed often and deep, with a view to keeping out the weeds that take nourishment from the good seed planted. Thus those who plow and sow prepare for the harvest. None need stand in the field amid the sad wreck of their hopes. The blessing of the Lord will rest upon those who thus work the land, learning spiritual lessons from nature. In cultivating the soil, the worker knows little what treasures will open up before him. While he is not to despise the instruction he may gather from minds that have had an experience, and from information that intelligent men may impart, and he should gather lessons for himself. This is a part of his training. The cultivation of the soil will prove an education to the soul. He who causes the seed to spring up, who tends it day and night, who gives its power to develop, is the author of our being, the King of heaven. And he exercises great care and interest in behalf of his children. While the human sower is planting the seed to sustain our earthly life, the divine sower will plant in the soul the seed that will bring forth fruit unto life everlasting. The end, and God bless you. This video was produced and narrated by Gary L. Studebaker.